Welcome back to Global Affairs with Rose. Today, I want to walk you through possibly one of the most ambitious, controversial financial proposals in EU history, a sweeping plan to use frozen Russian sovereign assets to fund a massive reparations loan for Ukraine. This could reshape how Europe thinks about frozen assets in wartime, and at the same time raise serious legal and geopolitical questions. What is the proposal? The European Commission, EC, has officially floated a plan to provide roughly 90 billion euros in immediate financing for Ukraine, enough to cover about two-thirds of Kiev's projected needs for the next 2 years, 2026 to 2027. There are two alternative mechanisms. 1. A standard EU-backed loan raised by borrowing in capital markets, with the EU budget as guarantee. 2. A so-called reparations loan, where the funds come from the cash balances of immobilized Russian sovereign assets held in Europe, mainly in the securities depository Euroclear, based in Belgium. Under the second option, the EC would exchange the frozen Russian cash with zero-coupon AAA bonds issued by the EU or its institutions, then channel that cash to Ukraine. Ukraine would repay the loan only if and when Russia pays future reparations, effectively making the loan a contingent grant, contingent on Russian defeat, or a negotiated reparations deal. If combined with other frozen asset holdings across the EU, not just Euroclear, the total volume could reach as much as 210 billion euros. Why it matters, and why Europe is under extreme pressure. According to EC estimates, Ukraine's financial needs for 2026 to 2027 are massive. Hundreds of billions to sustain defense, public services, and day-to-day governance. The reparations loan would allow the EU to meet a large share of those needs without increasing national debts, since the loan is backed by immobilized Russian funds, not new borrowing by individual states. For the EC, the proposal represents, in their words, the most effective way to sustain Ukraine's defense and economy. With the war dragging on and expectations that Ukraine's war chest may be exhausted by the spring of 2026, the urgency is very real, the legal, financial, and political storm. But this plan is far from universally accepted, and indeed has triggered fierce opposition from key players. The bulk of the frozen assets are held in Belgium via Euroclear, meaning Belgium and Euroclear stand to be at the center of any risk, including future legal claims if Russia seeks restitution. The European Central Bank, ECB, has publicly warned that such a loan could stretch the boundaries of EU law. ECB president has said that providing a backstop would violate its mandate. From a reputational and financial market standpoint, critics warn that using frozen sovereign assets, even in this loan not confiscation model, could damage confidence in the euro, deter future sovereign investments, and make other countries wary of storing reserves in the EU. On the political front, several EU members remain deeply uneasy. As of now, Belgium has refused to sign on, calling the proposal fundamentally wrong. Moreover, some analysts argue that using immobilized assets as a source of wartime financing could paradoxically reduce the incentive for Russia to negotiate, weakening leverage that the frozen funds currently provide in any eventual peace or reparations deal. What would happen, and what rests on what? If the plan goes ahead, the EC would offer the loan to Ukraine, giving Kiev the cash infusion it needs to continue defense and essential services in 2026 to 2027. Ukraine would not pay anything back immediately. Repayment would only come if and when Russia, after a ceasefire or peace settlement, agrees to pay reparations. Until then, the loan would effectively act as grant-like financing. Meanwhile, the immobilized assets stay frozen, replaced on paper by EU bonds, so Russia still has no access to its reserves while sanctions remain in place. But if sanctions lift, or if Russia challenges the arrangement legally, much could go wrong, including potential lawsuits, claims for restitution, or broader damage to Europe's reputation as a safe repository for sovereign funds. What's next? Why this moment is a political gamble. The EC has tabled a draft legal text for member states to discuss, and the final decision may come at an upcoming summit of EU leaders mid-December. Given the deep resistance from Belgium and worries from the ECB and some other states, the proposal may require compromise, potentially a mixed approach using both the frozen asset loan plus partial borrowing on markets, or even a watered-down scheme. If the plan succeeds, it would mark an unprecedented transformation of how frozen sovereign assets are treated, from immobilized to leveraged for wartime financing. That could have long-term consequences for global trust in European financial systems. If it fails, the EU may need to fall back on budget deficits, national borrowing, or continued piecemeal contributions, potentially jeopardizing Ukraine's ability to sustain defense and public services. My take: the risks, the reasoning, the moral hazard, I see the logic behind the EC's urgency. Ukraine's needs are enormous, and the war is grinding on. If Europe doesn't act now, Kyiv may face a financial cliff. From that perspective, using frozen Russian assets feels like found money, especially given that those funds are already immobilized. But there are serious counterarguments. First, the proposal blurs the line between immobilized assets and usable funds, undermining the principle that sovereign reserves should remain inviolate. Countries may think twice about parking their assets in Europe in future. That could loosen the euro's standing in global reserve markets. Secondly, the conditionality, repay only if Russia pays reparations, is a moral and political gamble. History shows victors seldom receive full reparations, and basing Ukraine's fate on a future, uncertain Russian payout seems naive. Finally, even if framed as a loan, this is effectively a wartime subsidy, and it sets a precedent, freezing, then reusing another country's sovereign assets to fund a conflict. That raises grave questions about international norms, property rights, and the rule of law. In short, yes, the desperation of the moment may push the EU toward radical choices, but this proposal carries long-term risks far beyond Ukraine. So, that is what the proposal is: a bold, risky, precedent-setting financial instrument that could alter the landscape of sovereign asset rights, wartime financing, and Europe's role in this conflict for years to come. What happens next will tell us not just about Ukraine's fate, but about what kind of Europe emerges after this war. I'd love to hear what you think about this. Is this a necessary gamble or a reckless overreach? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want, I can drop a thread of the main news articles for each part as a reference, so you can pick whichever you want to screenshot for your video. Until next time, I'm Rose. Stay informed.